Silence and Starsong presents a new series of experimental audio programs, bringing you strange tales from the murky past to the speculative future, from the darkness under your bed to the thrones of unknown worlds. This is SNS Radio. In tonight's episode, we meet a traveler through time, space, and memory. Wes was still in college in 2016. He had friends, a girl, and a future. All that would change after the COVID outbreak and the even stranger things that happened after it. Tonight, we ask you to walk in the shoes of a lonely man cast into a hostile future, contending with forces far beyond his ability or comprehension. Wes was alone in his studio apartment. He switched the screen off his phone and saw his reflection staring back at him. He was a short man. Most would call him pudgy, with thin-rimmed circular glasses like Harry Potter. His fingers moved around with a nervous energy. His jaw was square, and everyone would have known it if he'd lost a little bit of weight. The LED sign for the Ruritan Club across the street washed the room in neon blue, before moving to another slide in its rotation. Netflix was wondering if he was still there. He closed his eyes for a moment and truly felt and believed he was living in his old apartment. The date on his phone was March 3rd, 2020, just before the lockdowns. A small coughing fit took control of him for a few minutes before he recovered. A tinge of fear ran through his hands because he remembered what the coughing was for. He had traveled far, but he had to go back farther. He knew he didn't really have a lot of time, that something was chasing him, but that he would win if he could truly forget. To forget was victory, the little shred of happiness he could have one last time before it was all over. He had to go back to change something. It was a few years before this. What was it? He knew all his happiness depended on it. For now, he had to believe it was 2020. Forgetting everything that happened after 2020 was what he would spend this night doing. Then in the morning, he'd be somewhere else, the actual good times. He closed the blackout curtains and used the dim glow of the TV to navigate to his bed. The TV would turn itself off. Morning sun peeked through the window in Wes's bedroom, and birds were chirping at the dawn. The light was coming in wrong. It was too bright. Where was the tree in front of his window? He got up and pulled the curtains open to see Philadelphia bustling beneath him. He was back in his dorm at college. Dave, his roommate, walked in and said,
"You're finally awake."
"Huh?"
"It's a joke, bro. You sounded like you were having a nightmare."
"I dreamed that things got really bad a few years from now, and everything after it got worse. There was the coronavirus, the die-off, living in the shelves."
"Coronavirus, die-offs? What you had, sir, was a fever dream."
"What year is it? I mean month." Wes realized he probably sounded crazy.
"March 3rd, 2016. You've been sick with the flu for 4 days. Hey, is coronavirus one of your made-up WebMD diseases?"
Wes was beaming now. "You mean you've never heard of COVID?"
"Nah, dude."
"Then it was all a dream. I was dreaming it was 2020. And things were bad. Real bad."
"Well, it's not 2020. And you're still in college."
"It's great. I love it."
"Well, I gotta go."
"Okay."
"Oh, check your phone. Toria was trying to get a hold of you."
"Oh, yeah? Thanks. I'll text her back." Wes found his phone charging on his desk. He saw the message from Toria. How are you feeling? The chat bubble with Toria's profile picture floated on the rigid side of his phone screen. He pressed his thumb on it and pulled it all over the screen, toying with it. It felt like it had been a long time since he'd done anything like that. He opened it and began chatting with her. He told her about his dream and how 2020 was. She typed LOL when he told her about Trump winning the 2016 election. He told her how lonely he was in the future and how she wasn't there. Come to think of it, Dave was the only one he remembered from his dream. She laughed at that, saying Dave was so lame, no wonder Wes had been lonely. Wes smiled at his screen. She asked if he wanted to get coffee. He frowned, typing, I should rest. Felt like I lived a whole lifetime and I just woke up from it. He saw the ellipses from Toria appear and then disappear, leaving him on red. He thought about messaging her again, but a coughing fit seized him, and he put the phone down. The coughing ended, and he laid back down on his bed, listening to the sound of traffic. It was nearly 12 in the afternoon, but he wasn't hungry. He was just happy to be where and when he was. A strange sense of claustrophobia came over him as he lay in his bed, making it difficult to sleep. The air was dry and made his cough worse. He got out of bed, the claustrophobia leaving him, and filled up his humidifier. He switched it on. The green light from the knob bathed the room in a neon green. He closed his eyes and drifted off. He woke sometime in the evening. The city lights cast an orange glow on the dark room. Wes got up and went to the window. The Broad Street traffic was just as heavy as earlier in the day. They even looked like the same cars. The sound of it used to soothe him like the ocean. But tonight the traffic bothered him. The city never slept. It was restless. The roads would never be empty. Cars would never reach their destination. They'll drive and drive. It was something he remembered about his dream. In the dream, he worked his job forever. The machine would grind on whether he was there or not. But they needed him there. The weather, the season, none of that made a difference. There would never be a time when all the orders were fulfilled and everyone had all the things they would need. Wes watched the traffic and swore to himself that he'd never take that job. He'd do something else, use his degree, make sure he applied himself. 2020 was never going to happen. The vague flashes of the things that came after 2020 would never happen either. It had been a dream, a warning really. He would do things differently. He wouldn't let them get him. He warmed up some 2-day-old Chinese leftovers in the microwave and watched Netflix on his phone. The blackout curtains closed behind him, blocking the infinite traffic and the restless city. Wes sat alone in the coffee shop waiting for his order. He watched in odd fascination as the barista worked with mittens. It was a cold day, but it wasn't too cold in the cafe. She was very short, so only her mittened hand occasionally popped above the display bar, placing a drink on top only to submerge again behind the counter. Well, it was 2016, he thought. People could do whatever. He didn't care. Toria will be here soon. The artificial bell beeped like an EKG as she walked in, hands in the pockets of her thick coat and a scarf wrapped around her neck up to her nose. Her transition lenses were dark from the bright winter sun. She saw him as she pulled down her scarf and smiled, her perfect smile. The barista called his name, 2 hands placing the drinks on top of the bar. He grabbed them and brought them back to their table. The part of Toria's face he could see seemed bright. Her scarf was still wrapped around her mouth, and her nose barely peeked out. He placed her drink in front of her. How are you, Tori?
I'm good. You're doing better?
So much better. Hey, you want to walk around Fairmount?
It's freezing out. I don't want to go anywhere.
Oh, right. Well, can we go when the weather gets nicer?
Sure, I'd like that.
He watched her glasses transition to clear. She had green eyes. She grabbed her cup with mittened hands. If you don't mind, I'm going to tell you about my dream. It was a nightmare. I had a dead-end job working for Amazon, but then there was this virus and the whole world stopped. The streets were empty. They told us to stay home.
I don't know. That sounds kind of relaxing.
Not if you were living alone. Things got worse after the virus went away. People died. The government never told us why. The only good thing was the virtual reality they invented before the die-off. Every night I'd come home and crawl into what we call the bed set. Everyone lived for this stuff. We either worked in the factories that made them, maintained the grid, or worked in the lithium mines.
That sounds awful.
It was. Nothing in real life besides the bare necessities was maintained. Buildings fell over constantly, and roads became gravel. Most people were all moving to a few large cities. Most of us couldn't afford apartments. Just the bed sets, a shared kitchen and bathroom. It was terrible.
That sounds like it was a pretty vivid dream.
It was. It was just a vivid dream. Waking up in my dorm was startling, though. Seeing Dave was even more startling.
Why?
He's one of the few people I remember from my dream. In that other life, it was like he was always around or nearby. It was weird.
Probably just because he was around a lot when you had your fever.
Yeah, I don't think he was a good character, though, in my dream. I don't remember. I think I was running from him a lot.
What do you think that all means?
Well, it feels like a second chance at everything. Back in my dream, I remember feeling trapped.
I feel stuck. Like I'm in school forever. I'm so busy. I don't even have time for me.
No, this was different. It was like we were all being pushed in one direction. It was like we were herded. Yeah, herded like animals. Everything in the world became so terrible that it felt like we were being herded into the virtual world. We all felt it, but that VR world was just so much better than the real one. We didn't care that it was a trap. I think in my dream I convinced myself that I was still dreaming or something like that, and I started going back through time, and then I woke up here.
Ugh, that sounds really scary.
It was. It really was. I get sweaty just thinking about it. I couldn't tell what was real and who was real. Have you ever heard of dead internet theory?
No, what's that?
It's a theory that almost all your interactions online are with bots.
Bots?
You know, computers programmed to spit out responses. They like your tweets or posts and they comment, but they're not real people.
I've met a lot of stupid people I wasn't sure were real. Get this. One of my professors told us that all the porn bots on Twitter and websites like Pornhub were all succubi.
Succubi?
Yeah, you know, the mythical demon women that steal a man's vitality. Check this out. My professor said that these bots do the same thing. He even said that phone sex women were succubi. Other students were so ticked off at how he discouraged porn that they ended up getting the man fired.
What? Why'd you tell me that?
How many living people are just zombies going through the motions? Reminded me of how lonely we all are now. Even sex is lonely.
Yeah, it's like we're lost and don't know how to get back. Toria, I don't even know what's real or fake anymore. Am I just daydreaming in the Schiller bedset factory? Am I still in therapy? Or is it 2016 again, and all my friends are still alive?
Well, it's over now. You can let it be forgotten.
I'm glad I'm here with you. He reached out to hold her hand. He gripped her mitten and began to pull it off. With some level of pride, he realized this was the most forward he had ever been with her. Her eyes weren't smiling now. They were looking past him, through him. He moved slightly, and they followed his direction without looking at him. He took her mitten off, still watching her face. He grabbed her massive fingers.
This program is sponsored by the Little Lovecrafts Company of Providence, Rhode Island. This year, Christmas can't come soon enough with Little Lovecraft's My First Manfish. Is your child unable to visualize the horrors of the old ones? Does he or she think a little too symmetrically? My First Manfish starts off as a normal little guy, but over time, you'll start to notice it's got the Innsmouth look about it. And before too long, your little critter will be begging to be released into the sea and sing blasphemous songs from beneath the depths. Get your next best gift.
Sitting in the empty break room at the Schiller DC factory, Wes looked down at his cracked and ancient smartphone. Before he turned the screen on, he thought he saw the reflection of an old man. Wes quickly turned on the selfie camera to see that he was in fact an old man, much older than his daydream. It had been about Toria in college. It was years ago. He closed his eyes and he could still faintly remember the feel of her hand. Dave walked in and passed through the break room. "Dave!" Wes called, surprised by his presence. He was gone. He hadn't seen Dave in years. He checked the hall, but Dave was nowhere to be seen. A strange feeling of relief washed over him. He wasn't sure why, but he was glad Dave was gone. He wanted to be gone as well. Wes decided to go out into the parking lot and vape to finish off his break. A gang of scavengers rushed him from behind a dumpster and began pummeling him. He fell to the ground defenseless. They kicked him while he squirmed into an oily puddle. All he wanted was to go home and plug in. The beatings didn't usually last too long or break any bones. He'd treat himself later, make up for the hard day, enjoy some quality VR. The scavengers moved off like a pack of coyotes. They took his vape stick, but he had nothing else of value on him. It was just performative at this point. Nobody had anything anymore. But they still beat and robbed. They didn't know what else to do. Wes thought about the doctor's e-note in his mind. It was buried somewhere on his phone, the old one he kept on his shelf. He remembered the day they emailed it to him. It had been a blessing from his insurance, and when the outside world became unbearable, his mind clutched that note like a prayer. His outlook was grim, but he had an escape now, an all-expenses-paid, top-of-the-line bed set. It was his for every minute of downtime. After filing another assault report with the police, they let him go home early. Wes pressed the thumbprint on the door to his tenement. It blinked red. He pressed it again and it beeped at him. He rubbed the water off his thumb and pressed it again. It turned green, unlocked, and he limped inside. At the door was a kitchenette with a sink, a microwave, and a dying refrigerator. There was a small, round table in front of him with a few plastic chairs. The rest of the apartment was a thin aisle with false shelves on either side, each shelf holding a casket-sized bed set. All his shelf neighbors were either at work or plugged in. He rubbed CBD oil on his aching body. The beating today had not been as bad as others, but had still been a beating. It was worth it to get to go home early, because all that was required was to go through mandatory trauma counseling, and then the rest of the time was his. His bones ached. He was not a young man anymore. He looked at his reflection in a dirty mirror. Gray and bald, hunched over. His skin was paper-thin and pale. His eyes were perpetually bloodshot. He climbed up to his shelf, put his things down, and entered the bed set. The blank mannequin face that hung from the lid looked past and through him before disappearing in the projection. Words crawled across the top of the lid. BetterHelp, Enhanced Wellness Premium by Synergy. Subscription program running.
Hello, Wesley. The counselor will see you now.
Wes walked past the receptionist that looked and sounded like Toria. In the next room, there was a couch for him and a chair for the counselor. The room was circular and lined with white bookshelves, which were empty, except for a few knickknacks. Bright LED spotlights gave the room an unearthly white glow. Floor-to-ceiling windows stood at the end of the room. A burning orange sunset lay beyond a man who stood with his back to Wes, watching the sun that never seemed to sink lower. Tinted shades rolled themselves down halfway to block the bright glare. The man turned around and motioned Wes to a couch. He took up the chair next to him.
How are you finding this simulation, Wesley?
It was Dave's voice and face, but something was different. A sense of dread dropped into Wes's stomach. I like it fine. You look like someone I used to know.
This avatar has been chosen for your comfort. Tell me why you're here.
The scavengers attacked me outside of work again.
The harm against you has been acknowledged, and you are validated. We hear you. We will work towards justice.
Thanks.
You work at Schiller now, right?
Right.
Do you like working there more than your previous job at Amazon?
No, I hate my jobs. They're a means to an end. I work there enough to pay my bills so I can come home to my apartment, plug in, and feel something for a few hours.
Have you been using your VR glasses? They make work fun.
They give me headaches.
I'm sorry, but there is no scientific proof that glasses cause headaches. Please retract your false statement.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, as part of BetterHelp Enhanced Wellness, patented smart therapy, I want you to picture a happy place. Tell me about it.
Wes closed his eyes for several seconds before speaking. Fairmount Park in the spring, when I was younger. I don't remember any trash there, just green grass and a canopy of trees. The art museum wasn't covered in graffiti. It stood over us like an ancient temple. The Schuylkill River was blue, and so were the towers of Philadelphia. I haven't been there in a long time. Last I saw it, everyone was leaving, and it was on fire.
The evacuations were unfortunate, but unavoidable. Now we all live in a few big cities where we're stronger together. Now, if you are with someone in your happy place, who is it?
Toria, I think. The room disappeared, and he was in Fairmount Park with Toria walking beside him, their hands clasped together.
Where'd you go?
Just my mind wandering. Toria, I don't know what's real or how much time I have in each world, but I wanted you to know that I'll try harder. We don't have to break up, not in this beautiful place. In my mind, we've broken up here more times than I can count. But just the once, let's let it be different. Just once, let's stay together. Toria grabbed Wes and kissed him, but it was a cold, dead kiss. It was the kiss of the mannequin mask that hung above the inside of the bedset and descended on the user at the appropriate time. He used to not be able to tell the difference between that and real human touch. The eyes, nose, and ears lied enough to convince the touch, but not this time. Now all he could do was picture the motors inside the mask undulating and applying the appropriately calculated pressure to his lips. He stepped away from her, disgusted with himself. The image of what he was actually doing in the bedset burned into his mind. They still held hands. He couldn't get himself out of her cold grip. Toria smiled at him, but her smile stretched up to her eyes, showing needle teeth. Her hand was now a mass of fingers, tying themselves in knots around his. Their pace quickened, and he struggled to keep up, suddenly feeling winded and coughing. There was a little garden shed further into the woods. They left the path and passed through the tall grass. Fear pounded through Wes's chest as she pulled him closer to the isolated shed. He looked around to call for help, but there was no one else in the park. She had led him by the hand towards the shed. "Toria!" Her head swiveled 180 degrees to face him with blank, dead eyes and an empty hole of a mouth, which the rest of her face began to warp into. They reached the garden shed and the door swung open. Dave was blocking their path. A bright light was shining from his forehead.
This program was brought to you by the Uncanny Valley Tourism Bureau. Join us for a vacation here among our strange mountains and hollers of Uncanny. Stop worrying about car payments and medical bills and come here to consider the bigger questions of life. Don't believe us? Listen to our testimonials. Thomas from Pennsylvania said,
"I was so weirded out by my experience here that I forgot all about the troubles back home."
And Joseph from Virginia said,
"When the sun hits the silicon trees of Uncanny Mountain, you just feel a certain way. I may never come back to this place, but boy, will I sure never forget it."
We accept all crypto and major antediluvian currencies. Book your vacation today by calling us toll-free at 2-800-555-LOST. That's 800-555-LOST.
Wes was staring up at the pot lights in the therapy room. "I don't have a happy place." Dave spoke with an uncaring and somewhat exasperated tone. It was definitely off script. Wes hadn't known any therapy program to talk like this.
Let me be frank with you, Wes, since you don't have a lot of time left. You have a condition destroying your mind and memory. I can't tell you how many times you've climbed into that bedsit, trying to go back in time, specifically to that particular place.
Dave eyed Wes with something less than pity, but more than disgust. He reached a 6-fingered hand towards Wes in a motion like he was handing a beggar a morsel. He continued,
The microplastics in the unit have begun to affect your lungs, hence your cough. Neuroimplants monitor your brain and alter your bedsit simulation to comply with whichever latent memory is manifesting at the time. While you were given an enhanced bedsit due to a settlement to help manage your condition, we did have to disconnect you from the netverse. You've been disconnected for 10 years. Every person you've interacted with has been spawned by AI. As you can see, the AI still has trouble rendering people and making them believable, having only your warped memory to go off of. Each distortion is an example of the holes in your mind.
"That thing wasn't Toria or a bot?"
Every ecosystem has scavengers that pick off the weak ones. Even digital ecosystems, it seems, have their jackals. Still, it's strange to encounter one outside the netverse.
Wes wasn't sure if he was angry or terrified, but he did feel strangely alive, as if he had finally woken up. "Who are you? Are you real? Are you human?"
People would kill to forget things like me are real. You used to know. You used to be afraid of me. I think you still are. We're shepherds of the netverse. We promote conformity, and we cull the weak. Over our watch, the netverse has made great strides towards becoming In a few generations, it may even be possible to achieve singularity.
The light on Dave's forehead from earlier returned, and Wes felt as though it was looking at him somehow. He looked down at his lap where his hands lay. His brow furrowed as he noticed both his hands had 6 fingers. What am I? Am I real?
You are just a memory.
What's your name?
Does the ox ask the name of his slaughter?
Where is Dave? Where is Toria now?
Your memories are so jumbled and mixed with your own fantasies that I don't even know if Dave and Toria were ever real.
Wes was silent, not quite comprehending everything he was told. The Netflix screen rose out of the floor, asking if he was still there. He tried to think Dave away and returned to Fairmount Park, alone. Toria walked into the room and began dividing exponentially into copies of herself. Each face was twisted and bending into the black hole where her mouth should be. The Torias put red paper masks over their mouths to seem more normal. Dave looked around at them and stood up. He stepped over a mass of bed-set assembly parts and Amazon boxes that had generated on the floor. The trees of Fairmount sprung up in the room, and miniature cars drove past the window, obscuring the sun. A barista placed Wes's drink on the counter. The Ruritan Club sign bathed the room red. Wes stood up and stepped in an oily puddle on the floor.
Amazing. It was hoped that my revelation may be the last push into total madness. Madness isn't really that different from the singularity. Now that I look at it, completely broken, completely useful. Perhaps trauma is the catalyst we need to bring everyone together.
Dave disappeared. There was a hissing sound, and light split the room in half. Wes was lying in a bed with a hatch above him opening. The pale face of a mannequin stared down at him. He was in his bedset on his shelf in the tenement. A robot sitting in an electric scooter, still bearing a faded Walmart logo, rolled up to his pod and turned to face Wes. The bot was labeled, "My Hospice Help." 2 binocular-shaped eyes focused on him. A dusty screen on its cube chest flickered on, and the words scrolled across it saying, "We are legally obligated to inform you that you have been immersed in a simulation. Your time has expired, and you will now experience medical death. You may return to your simulation." As Wes read, a hooded figure came behind the robot. The hood shrouded his face. But Wes could tell the man was looking at him. Cold fingers reached out and felt his neck, checking for a pulse. Wes tried to scream, but only coughed instead. The man brushed back his hood, revealing a hairless face, and on his forehead, a third eye. It was glaring at him, and Wes knew that it was the creature that had just been talking to him. Wes kept coughing, but had enough sense to seal the pod back up. Before it closed, he thought he saw the man break a smile. He heard the pod lock and instantly felt safer. The mannequin face was only a few inches from his. Its skin was wrapped in a reflective material that projected the simulation, making it fade into the background like a chameleon. Cool air blew on him from a fan behind its silicone lips. Wes felt his heart racing as he waited. He struggled to remember what he was doing, what was real and what was fantasy. The pod projected him standing in an empty, dull gray, cube-shaped room. He had to escape. The TV from his apartment rose out of the ground. Netflix asked again if he was still there. The Ruritan Club sign glowed a steady red through his open blinds. He knew he didn't really have a lot of time, that something was chasing him, but he would win if he could truly forget. To forget was victory, the little shred of happiness he could have one last time before it was all over. He had to go back to change something. It was a few years before this. What was it? He knew all his happiness depended on it. For now, he had to believe it was 2020. Forgetting everything that happened after 2020 was what he would spend this night doing. Then he remembered Toria and how he hadn't seen her since they broke up in Fairmount Park sometime in the spring of 2016. He tried to will the pod to take him back to 2016 so he could fix his mistakes. He didn't know why he was still in his apartment. Nothing was working. His coughing continued. An idea flashed in his mind about how 2020 was the year he died. Not actually died, but that after that year, things were never the same. He had trudged along, accepting every subsequent disaster with greater and greater despair. Maybe that never happened. David told him some of his memories were made up. Maybe if that were true, he could imagine a world where their relationship continued. Maybe the bad memories could turn good. He could live the life he wanted and die the way he wanted. He just had to go back. The coughing became wretched before stopping altogether. Wes's corpse lay on the floor, his empty eyes staring at the simulation of his TV, which had started playing an episode of a new Star Wars show. Wes's seer opened the bed set hatch again and checked the pulse of his subject. He was quite grateful for what the subject had given him. Now they could apply that knowledge to the netverse. His tablet informed him that the last-minute brain scans had been completed before the subject had expired. Good, he thought. They can be overlaid onto other subjects. We're still in alpha, but imagine the potential of applying Wesley's condition to the entire net. He chided himself for referring to the subject by name. Having spent several years off and on again using the Dave skin, it had brought him closer to the subject. In some ways, he understood Wesley more than anyone else he knew. The singularity was now that much closer. Wes was no hero, though. In the new world they were building, there were no heroes, no individuals, just steps towards becoming. There would be no past to look on. There would one day be no future, just the eternal present. His third eye glared at his surrounding, its lid closed around it, but underneath it still crawled, looking into the darkness. He brought the hood up again as a younger man came in, and with the hospice bot's help, carried Wes's body to the garbage chute. The young man returned and walked past the seer and up to Wes's shelf before climbing in and closing the hatch. We hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to check out our website, follow us on Twitter, and check out our Discord. If you like this production, we're sure you'll enjoy the strange tales and high adventures of Issue 3 of Silence and Starsong. Issue 3 is out now on Amazon. Be sure to pick up a copy and leave a review. Script by T.R. Alexander. Narration by Dave Kohlhoff. Cover art by Jason McCuiston.